relentless focus, and boundless work ethic. Although my parents managed to find ways to get things on the cheap all over, most clothes and items were thrift store or secondhand items. Even those were hand-me-downs despite gender differences. Sisters versus the only boy, me. My mother would say to me, "Money is power." Simple, but to the point. Money is important. Money is authority. Money is respect. Money is very important. As my mother said, money is power. I was in accelerated learning programs in school. I was already a world-class hacker and cracker. I had written several role-playing games, RPGs, adventure modules, and I ultimately self-published one of them. I was making one of my adventure modules into a computer game that I was determined would ultimately be published. And in fact, it was when I turned 18 years old. I made a laser disk drive design and demo and an operational robot for high school science projects. And although challenged in my ability apparently by some, whether I did it or not, I did. And I earned recognition in local newspapers. I even collected, at one point, 1,000 aluminum cans in the Grand Canyon just to earn money and to save the environment in the process. All the while pursuing personal projects, I always strove to learn how to program, about graphics and music theory, about user interface design, and all sorts of computer software things beyond just pure academic stuff. And I rode my motorcycle in the foothills and the mountains of rural San Martin, Morgan Hill, and Gilroy. It was primarily my non-work time. Although I had a stepfather, he was rarely engaged in my life. He was instrumental at times, like introducing me to Dungeons & Dragons and taking me to a fantasy gaming convention once. He did not want me using the computer that he had purchased, but I did, and it was pivotal to my learning how to program and achieve all that I have. Whether intentional or not, his pursuit and passion for computer programming gave me the opportunity to seize that for myself as well, and I did. As a child, I never stopped. Like a shark, feeding on knowledge, on insight and achievements, I never ceased to move. I never stopped driving forward without letting my past hold me back like anchors. I always looked and moved forward. I never looked back. Riding my motorcycle in the hills and the mountains as my primary escape from the harsh reality of San Martin and my family circumstance. I would ride to the most remote locations where it appeared no human had touched it for years or decades, out in the middle of nowhere. I would ride across fallen logs over ravines. I would race up cliffs so steep that only high-speed zigzagging could traverse them, for otherwise the bike would flip over on itself or over on top from near vertical cliff walls. I would jump over small chasms with my motorcycle like Evel Knievel. I would splash through creeks and riverlets. I would slide and spin through mud and shallow puddles with my motorcycle. Once, my motorcycle sank in a mud puddle so deep that the bike's seat was barely visible. I had to get my mother to drive out into this area with a long rope and tie it to my motorcycle steering wheel and pull it with her truck out of the mud, for otherwise it was like quicksand. It took a week and some for me to clean and repair it from its immersive muddy destruction. Sometimes I would go so deep into the mountains that I would bring my pellet CO2 pistol as a sidearm. I would shoot the pellet pistol in the wilderness sometimes just as practice, in different areas just like I had done at home. I would drive to a few special areas to think. One place was at the base of an area called Mount Madonna. It was a beautiful cistern at the base of a waterfall that flowed down from an old ruined estate that was built of stone. All that was remaining was its stone foundation and fragments of its walls. It made it feel like an old fantasy story castle, nestled in the woods with magical waterfall feeding down below to reflective waters. This place was my inspiration for my very first game that was published, The Tower of Miraglen. No matter the misadventures or triumphs that I had on my motorcycle in the wilds, they were always magical and majestic and freeing. My motorcycle was my key to escape and freedom and to my sanity. There were many afternoons when I would return from school in San Martin and not be up to writing, programming, cracking, hacking, riding my motorcycle, playing a game, and certainly not doing more chores or tasks. Sometimes I just wanted to veg out and do nothing. I believe these downtimes were unintentional recharge windows for me to cope with problems that I was facing and to have time to wash the stresses off my mind enough so that I could resume my passionate pursuits of story writing, programming, and riding horses and iron horses. My biological father had kidnapped me at 6 months old and abandoned me ever since. As a young child, my grandfather shared a bedroom with me in a bunk bed for nearly a year as he recovered from a back injury trying to tame an unruly horse. He read stories to me, he told tales of his own life, he offered insight. He offered integrity to me through guidance. For that year, my grandfather was the closest thing to a father that I have ever had. As I grew older and we moved to San Martin, my grandfather was rarely around. He had remarried and was living his life. I would see him at least a few times a year still, because I liked and respected him. If there was one thing my grandfather imparted to me above all else, it was a simple message: work hard and be honorable. The black and white TV show, The Andy Griffith Show, shaped a lot of my personal views and even morality. As a teenager, I would sometimes watch Andy Griffith after school to unwind before starting something new. I looked up to the character Sheriff Andy Taylor. I enjoyed his laughable sidekick Barney Fife. His Aunt Bee was a lot like my grandmother was, hyper proper and vocal about her opinions. And Andy's kid Opie Taylor was me, the kid that wanted to do the right thing but might need some counseling from Daddy Andy. And Griffith was a lot like a surrogate father to me during those years. He always showed good character, high integrity, and a strong work ethic. I was inspired by Andy. The thing about Andy Griffith is that it was a world set in Mayberry, where crime is nearly non-existent, and people's greatest issues revolve around morality and compassion for others. The Andy Griffith Show reflected what I wanted the real world to be. But my world was unstable and full of threats and dangers, if not real and direct injury and pain. I wanted my world to be Richard's world, where things are like Andy Griffith's Mayberry. Low strife, low crime, most problems can be solved through reason and compassion. My world has never been like Mayberry. Throughout life, I would adopt the term Richard's world to represent my ideal world, where things are run the way I think they should be, and where righteous, just behavior is rewarded, and bad behavior is swiftly punished and mitigated. Richard's world is an ideal that will never be reality, but has been a North Star to navigate by for me. A friend down the street's parents started a little electronic assembly company that they called Unicorn Electronics. they hired me for a summer job under the table when I was 14 years old to assemble Chuck E. Cheese pizza and arcade life-size animatronic characters. I would spend hours on end inserting electronic components like integrated chips, resistors, capacitors, diodes, etc. into wafer boards that were then fed into huge wave solder machines that would solder or weld all the electronic components onto the board. The boards were then plugged into test harnesses that would light green if the board passed all operating specifications or red if it did not. We would inspect red boards for obvious cold solder joints. That was where components didn't have complete soldering, and so they might have holes or gaps. So we could fix those by manually using soldering irons. Any other red problems were just sent to a real technician to examine and ultimately fix or toss. I made a few $1,000s doing this, which was incredible for a poor country kid. I got real work experience in a cool area, arcade games and animating robots, and I made money. I managed to get another job, a summer job, assembling electronic boards as well when I was 15 years old, a year after I had worked with Unicorn Electronics. I spent the summer working for a man named Robert Cluer. He founded a small electronics company that assembled electronics on spec. My friend, Jeff Lefferts, and I rode public transit, a bus, every summer weekday to Cluer and Associates in a business park that he had in Gilroy, California. We brought our own soldering irons since the company only had cheap, low-quality ones and my mother had really nice, high-grade ones. Jeff decided that it was a pain, though, to carry the soldering irons back and forth. They were big and heavy and had big bases. And Robert Cluer, the owner, said, "No problem, you can leave it here." A few weeks later, we returned like every other day, but the door was locked. Cluer and Associates had a sign outside, "Out of business." What? We were not even paid for our last paycheck. Jeff lost my mother's soldering iron because he trusted Robert Cluer. But now Robert Cluer was gone. No trace. Nothing at all. Nothing in the state. Turns out he had a false identity. The whole thing, his business, it was entirely a scam. He allegedly received payment for the work that he skipped town on. It explained why his gear was so cheap and borderline unprofessional. We went to the local labor board, which said that we were working more hours than is allowed for us at our age at 15. Our work permits approved very little hours, in fact. They said they could do nothing to help us as a result. It was our fault. And besides, they did not know how they could find a Robert Cluer, since it was not his real name. I learned not to trust people in general, even those that have a professional facade, whether they are there to help you or to employ you. The truth is behind the veil. It must be pierced to see it. And people do not want you to see the truth that they are hiding. Desperate to make money, I looked to get an after-school or summer job. I wanted to buy the upcoming Apple II GS. The GS stood for graphics and sound, as it was a huge, big leap over the previous Apple II Plus. The GS computer would be thousands of dollars, and then there would be software. I needed a lot of money. I applied first at Taco Bell in Morgan Hill, California. They gave me a math test to see if I could handle the register. Well, I finished it in minutes, but the manager looked at me with dismay and disgust and said he hates cheaters and he will never hire one. The Taco Bell manager insisted that no one could complete the test that fast without a calculator. I guess I was a human calculator. It did not matter, though, what I said, or that I offered to take the test in front of him or other tests. He just rejected me. I then applied to Burger King in Gilroy, California. They did hire me right off to work on the Whopper and Specialty Sandwich board. in the back kitchen. The only notable incident that I experienced at Burger King was during the annual Garlic Festival. Things were insanely rushed and hectic. I had a Band-Aid on a finger, but after assembling a fish sandwich, it fell off. I don't know where it fell off, it was just missing. I had to assume it was in someone's food or something. But the management said, ignore it, move on. No one complained about a Band-Aid, or potentially blood, I don't know, in their food. But it made me realize how potentially unsanitary restaurant food can be. I was turned off of eating out entirely for a very long time, including my highly discounted Burger King meals where I worked. It was all disgusting to me. I worked at Burger King all summer and did make enough money to buy my Apple IIgs computer and a video cassette recorder player, a VCR, which could play VHS tapes. I wanted to watch videos while I used the computer and record TV shows that I loved, like Star Blazers and Captain Harlock. And the computer was a foothold towards my future. Sam learned of a summer intern program at his company, Tandem Computers. I applied for it, although I was not incredibly old, I was quite young still. I assume it was Sam's connection with Tandem that encouraged them to even interview me, but they did select me. I was hired for a summer job at Tandem Computers. I had no idea what to expect as a real programmer, but I was going to be programming for my job. I was 17 and I had a professional programming job. Woohoo! They did not expect anything from me, it turned out. I was an intern, so if I did literally anything remotely useful, it was a win to them. That was a mighty low bar to beat. Nothing. I asked engineers and technicians what they did if there was anything that they wanted programmed. I did not know if I could do what they might ask of me, but I was confident, if not conceited. I thought that I could pretty much do anything. An Asian engineer told me that he wanted a way to attach thermocouples, those are devices that measure temperature and humidity, to an object and collect readings from all the thermocouples every window of time at a set interval that he could specify. Well, that sounded mighty easy to me. I mean, all I had to do was basically read some devices and store the data over time. I asked if there was more to it. He chuckled and said, well, that would be amazing if I could do all that. And if I could even add to it, sending commands to the test harness so he could tell it what to do in software instead of going in and turning dials and pressing buttons by hand every time he wanted to try things out. He did say there was a software interface, but no one had ever tried. Well, that sounded like a real challenge. I asked around if that could be my summer project. Given no one had any expectations of me, everyone agreed that that could be my project. I researched everything to understand how much the test harness could do and how the machine in it worked. I learned how the thermocouples worked, how everything was cabled together, and how I could read the data through interface ports on a computer. I practiced using the manual controls to make sure that I understood how everything worked. I obtained a copy of Lotus 123. That was a spreadsheet of the era that's kind of like Microsoft Excel. And I exported the data that you could type in Lotus 123 spreadsheets into a comma-delimited text file. I did that so that I could read it in my program that I wrote in Pascal. I then read the text file and parsed out the data that was typed in the spreadsheet by the user. I would use the exported spreadsheet data to feed the commands to the test harness and the machine. I had to drive to the company Borland International in Scotts Valley, California. It was kind of a weird part of my job. They didn't have the software I needed, so I had to go buy it. I needed to get low-level hardware control device driver software that they have provided directly at the company, but not normally available to people who just buy the Turbo Pascal compiler and linker. I found an engineer there that met me outside and handed me the driver software that I needed. I was very resourceful. I had to write inline assembly functions to directly control the hardware as well. Pascal could not do it itself. But that was all easy stuff given my hacker and cracker background. Lastly, I wanted to impress with pizzazz beyond just functionality. I found a middleware called Vitamin C. It was a visual graphic user interface layer that gave a Windows Macintosh-like mouse-driven interface on top of otherwise text disk operating system DOS. Uniting Lotus 123 spreadsheet, a hardware device driver, my inline assembly native machine code, the Vitamin C GUI API, and Turbo Pascal, I successfully wrote my thermo temperature control software package for Tandem computers. What was my thermo temperature control software used for? Was it even used at all? After all, I was an intern. Nothing was expected of me. So I ask again, was it ever used? Well, I will tell you the answer. The manager and engineers were extremely impressed. My software let them enter temperatures and humidity for any given moment over a timeline. And it read the status of each thermocouple and recorded them across the same timeline, so that it could later be imported in spreadsheets for further analysis. Now, that was awesome. The blue thermo temperature test machine was a large, refrigerator-sized unit that could house a large computer. Setting the right combination of temperature and humidity made it scorch, freeze, rain, even snow. I felt like a god. But it got better. Everyone was so impressed that they moved my setup to a massive walk-in thermo temperature chamber. They tested satellites and other huge things inside it. It was so cool to see my software snow on a satellite that was destined for outer space. Again, I felt like I was a god at 17 years old, albeit a technological god. I had played around in my last time at Tandem Computers, not having any time to do another big project and having finished the big God project. I made a false operating system prompt program that would snarkily react to commands that were entered into it. For example, normally you could ask for a directory of files, but I made it if you asked for a directory, it would decline. It would tell you that you're invading its privacy. I had all sorts of jokes for almost every command that a user could enter. The machine had to be rebooted to disable my prank operating system. The hacker in me just could not leave things dormant. I had to leave a footprint. In fact, on my very, very last day, I wrote a farewell email to everyone at Tandem. Literally. I did not realize how big Tandem Computers really was when I entered my wildcards in all recipient fields. Both my manager and I received the emails from all over the world, wishing me the best endeavors as it was my last day. Indeed, I sent my emails to everyone globally that was employed by Tandem Computers, and that apparently was a lot of people. The experience of working at Tandem was incredibly awesome. What 17-year-old gets to go to a job with satellites and thermo-temperature humidity simulators that can control chambers and entire rooms and give them the ability to make things snow and rain, to create fog, to do anything? I was motivated to carry on and do more amazing things.